they get this MSW degree and then they can't pass the licensure exam and they can't practice, we're doing them a disservice. So I
Mhm.
do feel like the onus is on us as educators to do a better job.
I'm Joshua Andrews, the Director of Marketing and Communication for the IU School of Social Work, and I am here with Dr. Susan Glassburn. Dr. Glassburn has an article in IU School of Social Work's academic journal. The journal is called Advances in Social Work, and we're here to talk with Dr. Glassburn about the article that she has in there. This particular journal is a special edition about licensure, and there's lots of poignant and interesting things about licensure in this journal that, not being a social worker, I never even thought could be an issue. And I think that your piece brings a lot of that to life. So can you get into why you went into studying licensure?
Yes, thanks. Well, as you said, there's been a lot of controversy about licensure recently because of the disproportionate pass rates for people of color. Some states are doing away with licensure exams, some states are just business as usual. But for students who have to take a licensure exam, it's very stressful. They go through their MSW program, some students 1 year, some students 2 years or more.
Mhm.
And then at the end, to be able to call themselves a social worker, they have to pass this test. And it's high stakes for them, right? And so a lot of the things that had been written about the test were some about like psychometric properties of the test and kind of looking at like the history of licensure. What we wanted to do was to really ask the student or the graduates themselves, like, how did you prepare for this? How did you manage your anxiety about taking this test? And then what really does it mean to you to be licensed?
Mhm.
So we wanted to privilege the voices of the people taking the test themselves, which we thought was kind of a unique perspective that other people weren't doing.
When you selected the people who you were going to speak with, were you conscious of the race of those people? And if so, were you trying to get a representative sample, or were you trying to overrepresent the underrepresented?
Well, we tried to get anybody who would talk to us, and unfortunately, our sample was like 86% Caucasian and
Mhm.
only 9% African American and 5% who did not identify. So really 85% of the people we talked to. So we that was a big limitation of our study. And so this study was done not just by me, but I have 6 colleagues from other universities in Indiana, other schools of social work from like Ball State, University of Southern Indiana, Indiana State, Marion University, Purdue Northwest. So we tried to get like broad representation and did the best we could. And we had a fairly short time frame to pull this article together to be able to make the deadline. So if we were going to do it again, we would absolutely try to sample the folks that are disadvantaged perhaps by
Mhm.
this and oversample them, as you said. But we just kind of got what we got with our sample and we decided just to see what they thought. What does it mean to be licensed? So that was really our focus. That was really our research question was what does it mean to you to be licensed? What was it like for you to have to take this test?
And speaking of what it means to be licensed, the name of the piece is "It Means Everything and It Means Nothing." So can you kind of speak to the dissonance or the dichotomy of that experience? And I would imagine that it means everything and means nothing comes from the same person. Like, it's not that one person thinks it means everything and someone else thinks it means nothing. I think my thought is that to the same person, it can mean everything and it can mean nothing.
I think there were some people who felt both ways about it, but there were some people who felt strongly one way or the other.
Hmm.
There were some people who felt like it didn't mean anything. Like, I'm not a better social worker now than I was before I took this test. Like, I
Hmm.
am the same person. What I had to do was I had to learn to take this test and I had to learn the test logic so that I could pass it. But it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that I'm a better social worker in any way. It just means now I have like cred, right? I have
Yeah.
some credibility. And then there are other people that really felt like, you know what, social workers should have a license and it is a mark of legitimacy and it really shows that we know our stuff and it shows the public that we are professionals, and they just felt like it was a validation of everything that they had worked for. Like, I worked really hard in my MSW program. I passed this licensure exam. I am a licensed social worker, and it really is so validating. It makes me feel like this is what I worked for. So there were people on both sides, but a lot of people or like what you said, they were a little bit in the middle. Like, on the one hand, I passed this test, and at the same time, I passed a test that's kind of known to be biased and privileges some people over others. So, what does that really mean that I passed it? And maybe it shows I have privilege, and that feels a little uncomfortable, right? That maybe I passed the test because of some privileges that I have had. So, there were a lot of people who kind of felt a little like, I don't want to blow my horn about passing this test because I realize that I had a lot of things like some people maybe didn't have to work or they had financial support and could pay for some of the review classes.
Hmm.
They may not have had children when they had to take the test, when they were studying and had to like focus. So it is an interesting thing that like on the one hand, they felt like this is great, I passed. And at the same time, they're like, but what does it really mean? So you're right. People were kind of all over the map, but that's definitely the big theme that emerged that people have very different feelings about it, very different ones.
You spoke about the barriers. That was going to be where I was going to go next. It seems like it's really any test, any licensure situation, most likely um, is created by a certain amount of certain people, and they think about their own life experiences in the process of creating this test. I mean, I can think back to, I mean, the show Good Times when Michael was upset about the test taking, and he kind of didn't feel like the test was asking questions that were relevant to him. So like, this isn't a new phenomenon. But
No,
what
it is not.
what
And
is it
it's not
about the
right.
licensure test specifically that specifically disadvantages people at all? Like, what is it about that test that brings that out?
Well, I mean, all standardized testing that is like who writes the questions, who's the target audience. Do I know are the Association of Social Work Boards who writes the test. I know they really try to do what they can to have a lot of people look at every single question they put on that test.
Mhm.
So to be fair, I know they do it, but at the same time, I know students do feel like some of their practice wisdom is discounted.
Mm,
There was another article that was released really not very, I think just last year, and several students said that they were told to think like a middle-aged white woman when you took the test and that you would be more successful. And so that was interesting too, that we're kind of telling students of color in particular to kind of set aside that. One of the other things that students talked a lot about was that you have to understand how the test works, and you have to take one of these study prep courses like Don Apgar's course, or there's a guy on YouTube. It's called RayTube, and it's free, but he explains a lot of the questions. But the questions you have to think about, they'll say, here's a scenario. What do you do first? Or
mhm,
what's after this? What do you do next? And so it's all about sequence, like where you enter into this scenario, you have to think about like the steps of engagement. And students were like, that was super helpful because what they would have thought from their practice wisdom would not have been right. So a lot of times they're like, in real life, you don't maybe have the luxury sometimes of doing some of the assessment, you're kind of thrust into something. And so they're just saying you have to kind of set aside some of your practice wisdom and think about what is the test really asking me. So you had to kind of learn the test logic to be able to pass it. And that feels a little bit inauthentic, right? It's not really a test of your wisdom, it's a test of your ability to take a test. And I
mhm.
think every test is like that. The SAT test, right? Like students take all these prep courses because they need to understand how the test works. Should you skip questions or not? Can you go back and forth? If you have to guess, what's the best way to do that, right? Like all of that stuff is just as much a part of the test as your own knowledge and wisdom.
When you were speaking to people, what did they say about putting themselves to the side? Or I guess one, my thought is if you spoke to someone who mentioned that, did they find it useful information? But two, how did that make them feel internally to have to do that?
Yeah, right. I think that's a part of this that really came out was that you do have to sort of not approach the question maybe like you would in real life, but approach the question as thinking about the test taker or the test itself and what it's looking for. I
Mhm.
have a quote from a student that said, "You have to read the questions a certain way with a completely blank slate every single time. You can't come in with any assumptions about anything, like you don't know this person, you don't know their situation unless it's in the script. So if you read into it a little bit and make any assumptions, you may guess wrong about the answer. So you have to be like very much just exactly what's written and think about like where you were at in the process of engagement with this client. And that they just said that was the tricky part. You had to learn that, and someone taught them how to do that when they took the prep courses, if they were able to take a prep course. Those are not necessarily inexpensive.
In the real world, when you're working with someone, when you are giving care to someone, you can't approach them with a blank slate, right? You have to understand what's going
Well,
on
that's exactly right.
and what their home situation is like. You have to understand what their childhood was like to be able to point them in the right direction. What do you, I don't know if it's what do you think or what did your research find is a good medium between those two? Because I know that there are alternate ways that you can kind of just take your practice and get a certain amount of supervised hours to get there, but then the test is still the main mark.
Yeah.
Like, what
The
do you think
test is
would
the deal,
be a
right?
good way
Right.
or like the most effective way to bring a social worker into the field?
Right. There is no shortcut for the test in our state. Other
Mhm.
states have some different arrangements. For example, Illinois no longer requires a licensure exam. In some states, if you fail the licensure exam, I think the clinical licensure exam, there are two levels. There's an LSW and an LCSW here in Indiana, and most states have two levels of licensure. If you fail the second one, you just need to get more supervision hours and you don't have to retake it. So there's a lot of different approaches to that, but you are exactly right when you said that context is everything in social work because there is no such thing. I mean, you get a little tiny scenario, they give you a little bit of information, but in real life, you're looking at body language, you're in an environment, you may have more history, there may be other people in the room. There's a lot happening, and you're trying to process all of that information. And also, you have a specific role with your agency, you have parameters that are about your job that you have to follow certain policies and procedures. So there's really no such thing as context-free social work. And so when you're taking an exam, that is sort of what they're asking you to do is to kind of not know the context and then look at this scenario from the little bit of information you get and make a decision about it. Uh, yeah, I know one of the students said that they feel like they almost had to set aside their practice wisdom and just take this test and for what it was, like just look at the questions and that felt very weird. And that there's a disconnect for them between being competent as a social worker and then passing this test. Like the test doesn't mean they're a great social worker, but it's a rite of passage and something you have to do. So we have it for title protection, but we're putting students through this process. And then at the end of it, like, what does it really say about them? It says they're a good test taker. It says they had some privilege. It says they, perhaps were able to take a course or two to study about how to take the test. But does it mean that they are qualitatively a better social worker than they were, a couple of months ago? I mean, that was our big takeaway, we have what we call competency-based education in social work. So students have to meet like there are 9 competencies that our Council on Social Work Education puts out, and we want students to be able to practice, learn how to engage, learn how to assess, learn how to do an intervention with someone, and we make them prove that in their practicum placements. They all have to show up and do the thing. They're evaluated by another professional in the field. And so people are saying, isn't that enough? If you've passed the competencies, you've done the education, and you've shown that, students do 3 semesters, 2 semesters of practicum 20 hours a week. Isn't that demonstrating competence already? So a licensure exam just seems like we're putting a cherry on top of a sundae that would taste just as good without it. There's so like I said, there's a lot of controversy about it, and our students were very aware of that. But the ones who passed, it was interesting how the ones who had we interviewed some students before they took it, some students who had already taken it, and some both before and after. And I was interested to see that some of the ones who even before felt like, yeah, it's kind of not a big deal, the licensure exam. I know maybe it's kind of like, it's great to pass it, but it doesn't make me a better social worker. But after they passed it, they just felt like it was such validation, like I did this thing. Now I'm an LSW. Now I'm legitimate and competent. So it was kind of like a magical thing that happened for them, a little bit more of a that they were pretty excited about passing it and maybe imbued it with a little more competence than they did before. I just think it's such a relief to have that out of the way. And then they almost already started worrying about the next level of testing they had to take 2 years later. Like, okay, I passed this one, but now 2 more years, I've got to take the next level. How am I going to do that? So there was already like anxiety starting about that next test 2 years away.
So you are a faculty member here at IU School of Social Work. Does the dilemma around licensure impact the way you teach?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in social work, we don't do a lot of objective multiple choice questions. We do more papers, we do reflections, we'll have students do projects as a group. We focus on collaboration, and we really focus on integration of material, like apply it to a case study and things like that. And so I don't teach to that test. That test is very much multiple choice choosing. And so I wonder if, as educators, we need to work in more of those test questions and we need to do more of that kind of testing so that students are more prepared. I think about that sometimes. Or I have been telling students since I wrote this article, here's what the students in this research study, here's the resources they used, here's what they found helpful. And I've been talking to them a lot more about, you need to learn how to take the test. So I feel like this whole art writing this has made me much better able to give students my practice wisdom. Like before I did this article, I always kind of thought, students have been in school getting this master's degree. They're going to go take this test. And I was always like, take it sooner than later. You're very prepared. Just go take it. The longer you wait to take it, your knowledge you'll forget some things. So go take it now. But now I would not say that. I would say, don't just go take it cold. I would say, take a prep course, learn the
Right.
test logic, understand the structure of those questions, understand that you need to be fairly context free when you approach every single question, and you need to understand where you're at in the process of looking at those questions, like where you're at in the engagement cycle with clients. And so I would give them very different advice now since I have done this article, and all my colleagues felt the same way, that we feel like we're much better able to tell students a little bit about this and prepare them. But I think there's a disconnect between how we are teaching in the classroom and then them having to go take a standardized test.
Do you think it's possible to bridge that gap of the disconnect, or are they just two separate entities of the social work journey?
Well, I know there's a new version of the test coming out, I believe maybe next year. And I think they are trying to have it be linked to the social work competencies more. So I don't know if they're just going to try to map all the questions to which competency or if they're actually really going to try to rework the questions. But I know there's some things that are happening like that. But I do think, like I said, maybe we need to be thoughtful about integrating old test questions into our classes. We can get those. I know our school does a lot, and every school does its own thing. We try to we give students access to a course for 6 months. They get a really reduced, I think they don't pay very much for that, and we have lots of seminars and workshops for them to go to, like, in the last semester of their MSW program, trying to get them ready. So we do a lot. I think all of my colleagues said their school does something. But yeah, maybe we should lean in more, especially for our students of color. I don't think we're doing enough to help them, and I'm not sure what that would look like, but to me, we need to have a conversation as a school is how can we make sure that, 95% of our students can pass this test? And that's what we need to do is figure out how to do that because if they get this MSW degree and then they can't pass the licensure exam and they can't practice, we're doing them a disservice. So I do feel like the onus is on us as educators to do a better job of weaving questions in that are similar to what they'll have on the test, giving them all the information they need, and even talking about test anxiety and how to deal with all of that anxiety going into these tests. They're high stakes, and
Yeah.
controlling your anxiety so you can think clearly is a big part of that as well.
When we spoke, when Micah spoke with Dawn Apgar yesterday, her article was it was more about what can be done or how to address the disparities and the inequities. Your piece is more experiential, but
Yes.
with with your new perspective of these 22 new people, these 22 people, what do you think? Like you said, there is almost a responsibility for the educators. What do you think can be done to like are there anything specific that we can do? Because Don Abgar talked about advocacy and helping maybe the financial barriers to help out. There are logistical ways to try to help overcome
Yes.
the
Yes.
disparities from certain outcomes, from certain perspective. But
Right.
are there
I
ways
totally
to
agree.
overcome
I
it
totally
for
agree.
this
Yeah.
people?
Well, I totally agree with what you said. We live in times when our budget is tighter now than it has been in the past, I think. But I do think schools have a responsibility to, if we can offer free licensure prep for students, that would be great. We can't do much in terms of like helping them find the time to study because a lot of our students are working one job and a half. They've got kids, they're caring for other family members. We can't do much to mitigate that, but I think if we can at least eliminate the cost barrier, that would be really important. I also think that while, like I said, students are in school, we should be integrating more of those test questions from previous years and into our classes so that students get used to like understanding how that test works. I know schools of nursing are pretty intense about saying that you get through our program, our nursing program, you will absolutely pass the licensure exam because we will make sure. And I know a lot of schools of nursing like guarantee you can pass their, I think it's the NCLEX that they take, and I think we need to do the same. We need to be like, if you're going to come to our MSW program and graduate, we're going to do everything we can while you're in school to make sure you can pass that licensure test. So,
For that
like I said,
nursing program, is the guarantee that our course will prepare you, or the guarantee is we will work with you side by side until you get that license?
it's the guarantee that the program will prepare you.
Mhm.
When they have woven in test questions, they teach
Okay.
to the test. They teach to the test. And they make sure that students can pass it. I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I've only read about it, so I don't know like what our nursing colleagues do here on our campus, but they do not have some of the disparities because they make sure that students are going to pass. And so if we are going to have to stick with this licensure exam, if that's going to be a thing students are going to have to continue to do, then I think as educators, we need to have a conversation in each school about how are we going to make sure our students can pass? What do we need to do? And like I said, I think there may be different places of time in the program when we have little mini workshops and we have them, take some tests and we have talk about the tests out loud as a group, like why is this the right answer? And get them to really understand how to take this test. So as much as we can do, I think our school's been good about offering things at a discount and providing a lot of resources and information. And I think there's been like some ability to access some things for free, but we probably need to integrate it more instead of just at the very end.
This might be a repeated question, but I feel like it comes up again in my mind when you talk about the nursing program teaching to the test. In that, do you think that teaching to the test would create better social workers? Because where the question comes up again for me is that you noted that there are less disparities in the nursing field. Part of that comes from teaching to the test because that prepares every single person who's in there on the program's time. And they're doing their best within their own programs in their own college and their school to make sure that everyone has the ability to pass this test. I think it's different for social work because, like you said, there's so much context to it, and there is context to nursing and understanding histories and stuff like that. But it feels like you need that context to um be a good social worker. So it feels almost like teaching to the test is stripping that context that you need to be a good social worker. So that's a long way of asking the question of, if schools decided to start teaching to the test and remove some of those disparities, would that change the value or the quality of the social workers that it produces?
I think you can do both. I think you can teach to the test and teach students about the complexities and the context of clients. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So that's what I think, is that we need to lean into maybe teaching about how to take an objective test
Hmm.
and about some of that test logic, and have some little moments throughout the program where we kind of hone in on that, but also do what we're really good at doing now, and that's application, that is competency-based education where students learn by doing. I think there needs to be both, and I think in some ways we're doing them a disservice if they get an MSW degree and then they can't pass the test.
Hmm.
And we know people of color pass the test at like 60, 70, 75%, and white students are passing in the 90s. So we need to, if we're going to be really good stewards of their money and their time and their education, I think we need to do that more. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't have all the answers, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely more committed to thinking about that. I know right now we have just a lot of plates spinning in social work and what's happening in the environment here, the political environment, but I do feel like this needs to be a conversation. We should make sure our students are prepared to pass this exam as long as it's still a requirement. And for the foreseeable future, it really is. So we just got this published. So I feel a little empowered to start to have some discussions about it. But again, I don't know what that will look like. But like you said, if nursing has this commitment to it, I think we could similarly do both things.
Hmm.
Talk about the test and help them understand the more nuanced sets of skills as well.
Is there anything else about this piece that we didn't discuss that you think is powerful and that people should hear about?
One of the things we did in this piece is we listed all the different things that students use to study, all the different apps, all the different resources that they had. And I think that's helpful for social work educators to read and to look at so that you know what's out there and you can recommend those things.
Hmm.
And even since we've published it, I've heard students tell me other ones too. There's all these different apps like Study Prep and Quizlet, and there's just a lot of things. But I think that's really important to know as an educator. Is That's a big takeaway for me, is know what's out there, what are students using that has helped them be successful in passing this test, and recommend that to your students.
Well, thank you, Dr. Susan Glassburn, for your time. I got a lot more out of hearing you talk about it. Really brought it to life for me. So I appreciate you giving me your time and giving our audience your time as well.
Well, you asked me great questions, Josh. So even though you're not a social worker, you are getting the lay of the land very quickly.
I'm
So thank you
trying.
so much.
All right. You have a good day.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye bye.